Welcome to the first of the brand new Ultimate Killer Guides. Now, a quick note about this before we start with today's on Dredge. So previously I have created 7 Ultimate Killer Guides, and whilst at the time I did like them, many of them now are very outdated and no longer relevant to today's DBD climate, if you will. So I will be redoing the last 7 in the future as well as all the previous ones that I missed. So that brings us on to the Dredge today, and unlike the lackluster previous ones in this video, we are going to be covering everything that the Dredge can do and is capable of, as well as some other things as well. So here are the timestamps and the chapters for what we are going to be covering in today's video. Firstly, we're going to go over Dredge's base mechanics and his power, before moving on to perks, including breaking down his 3 teachable perks, as well as some great builds for him and perks you should avoid. After that, we're going to go to his strongest add-ons and his weakest add-ons, followed by all of my delicious tips and tricks, as well as common mistakes that people make with the Dredge, and then finally we're going to be talking about his weaknesses and how you counter him as a survivor to exploit those weaknesses. So feel free to skip to the information that you want, but I do highly recommend watching this all, of course, to make sure that you are as well equipped with the Dredge as you possibly can be. But let's get started. So firstly, to understand the Dredge, we need to know what he is like mechanically and analyse his power. Dredge has a base movement speed of the normal 4.6 meters per second, a bog standard 32 meter terror radius, and is classed as a tall killer, with a moderate difficulty level, which I would say is accurate. His power, Reigns of Darkness, does the following. His special ability is the Gloaming. Press and hold the power button to charge this. When charged, you will leave behind a remnant, which by clicking M1 allows you to teleport back to it, which makes it fantastic to pressure survivors around loops. But be careful, as survivors can run through this remnant to remove it and stop you from teleporting back. But also, whilst charging the Gloaming, you are able to teleport to lockers. You look at the locker that you'd like to teleport to, wait for it to turn red, and then press the ability button to teleport there. Now, with teleporting, you are allowed on base 3 tokens to use, which every locker you teleport to, consuming a token. When you run out of tokens, you will be forced to leave the last locker. Now, as the Dredge, the survivors have the ability to lock locker doors from the outside, which delays the time it takes for the Dredge to pop out from these lockers. These can also be seen in yellow when teleporting, and if you notice a locked locker door, you can break the lock with a basic M1 swing to it. But Dredge also has a second part to his power called Nightfall. Now, throughout the game, the Nightfall meter will charge, however actions as the Dredge can also increase its charging speed. This includes teleporting, waiting in lockers, injuring healthy survivors and hooking them. And Nightfall charges faster for each survivor in the injured state. Once the Nightfall meter is full, you guess it, Nightfall begins. Now, during Nightfall, survivors will be in total darkness. The Dredge can also teleport faster to lockers with a shorter cooldown and also no terror radius. Nightfall lasts on base 60 seconds, and if the Dredge teleports to a locker with a survivor close, it will give Killer Instinct, indicating where the survivor is, even though that isn't stated anywhere in the power. Now, that no doubt was a lot of information to take in, so to sum it up as best as I can, you can charge your power to drop a remnant. Then with that you can teleport to lockers or teleport back to the initial remnant point. Whilst this is happening, Nightfall will be charging and active throughout the trial, which you can speed up with actions. Now let's quickly talk about some stats for Nightfall, as this for Dredge is his strongest form and definitely what you should be aiming for whilst you play him. Now, it takes 300 charges to activate Nightfall and naturally charges by 0.25 charges per second. However, with 1 injured survivor it will charge at 1 charge per second, at 2 charges per second, and so on and so forth up to 4. Hiding in lockers as Dredge also charges it by 6 charges per second, hitting a survivor with a base attack adds 20 charges, hooking a survivor also adds 20 charges, and teleporting back to the remnant adds 10. Now, none of this really matters gameplay wise, but I do find it good to know so that you can understand some of his add-ons better in the future. And lastly, about his power, you are actually able to catch survivors in lockers whilst teleporting, and this classes as an insta-down, and the caught survivor will immediately be carried on exiting the locker. The 2 ways that Dredge can catch survivors in lockers is by either teleporting to a locker that already has a survivor inside of it, or by having the survivor interact with a locker that has the Dredge inside of it. Whether that be trying to lock the door or get inside it, both will result in a free grab. And that's covered the basics and everything you need to know about his power and his mechanics. Now to move on to his 3 teachable perks and builds I'd recommend for all calibers of player. So to begin with, his 3 teachable perks are Disillusion, Darkness Revealed and Septic Touch. Disillusion activates 3 seconds after injuring a survivor by any means and lasts for a total of 20 seconds. During those 20 seconds, if a survivor vaults a pallet inside your terror radius, the entity will instantly break that pallet and then Disillusion will then deactivate. A decent perk with some decent payoff, however on the Dredge it actually is fairly weak since the Dredge doesn't have a terror radius in Nightfall. It effectively doesn't work for him during this time, which really isn't ideal. The next perk is Darkness Revealed, which when searching a locker, the auras of all survivors within 8 meters of another locker will be revealed to you for 5 seconds before going on a 30-second cooldown. This can be a very strong perk depending on what killer you use it for, and with Dredge it can be fairly useful when you're not in a chase looking for the next survivor. And finally we have Septic Touch, which whenever a survivor heals within your terror radius, the survivor will become blind and exhausted. Blindness prevents survivors from seeing auras, and exhaustion prevents survivors from activating exhaustion perks. However, for the same reason as Disillusion, Septic Touch isn't actually the best on Dredge, as it is terror radius based, and well, honestly, it isn't actually the best in general, as it's quite situational and normally survivors aren't that cocky enough to heal dead in front of you, and even if they do, once you realise you've got Septic Touch, they just won't. On the whole, some fairly decent perks depending on what killer you'd like to run them for. On the Dredge, not the strongest, but definitely there's worse options out there for perks. Now I'm going to be recommending 4 builds for 4 different levels and playstyles. For a strong build, good from mid to high MMR, I'd recommend Make Your Choice, Save the Best for Last, Jolt and Pain Resonance. Pain Resonant and Jolt are both fantastic gen regress perks for the Dredge that will allow him to stay on top of Generator's progress. Save the Best for Last is great for keeping his pressure high and his chases short, and Make Your Choice means that most times you'll actually be able to constantly swap out a hook survivor due to his fast teleporting and pressure. For newer players, or for those of you who don't have a wide array of perks yet, I would recommend Jolt, Scourge Hook Monstrous Shrine, Darkness Revealed and Sloppy Butcher. Jolt again for the fantastic gen regression, Monstrous Shrine to help kill survivors on the hook and pressure the rest, Darkness Revealed for good survivor information, and Sloppy Butcher to keep survivors injured and charge your Nightfall faster. The next build is a surprisingly good vaulting build, run Superior Anatomy, Bamboozle, Barbecue and Chili and Pain Resonance. With Superior Anatomy and Bamboozle you will instantly vault and shut down windows, taking survivors by surprise for easy hits, then hook the survivor on a hook with Pain Resonance and teleport to the next chase with Barbecue and Chili. And finally, for a phenomenal basement pressure build, run Make Your Choice, Agitation, Scourge Hook Monstrous Shrine and Scourge Hook Floods of Rage. With Agitation, get the survivor into the basement, then when the rescuer screams, teleport quick to the top of the lockers in the basement, and with Floods of Rage identify the rescuer for an easy and free down, with Monstrous Shrine then making survivors die faster on the hooks, pressuring them to do it sooner. Also on my channel is 6 builds I'd recommend with Dredge if you want some more inspiration, and if you care enough I actually have every perk ranked on the Dredge too, so if you want to know what his best perks are and what perks to avoid, feel free to go check that out as well, as I do get fairly detailed with it. As for perks I would avoid, besides the main bunch that are universally condemned as the worst, I would avoid his own Septic Touch and Disillusion as previously discussed by his terror radius. I would also avoid Iron Maiden as it seems very appealing since the Dredge's power revolves around lockers, however Iron Maiden adds absolutely nothing to his game. I would also say that Bamboozle shouldn't be used as it can be a crutch perk against learning his power and honestly isn't needed. However, even though I know I might be a little bit of a hypocrite for including a build with it, it's good in niche cases but generally I would avoid it. Now let's move on to his add-ons. So for Dredge, he actually has a decent collection of add-ons. Most add to his gameplay in some way, and he has very few that offer nothing, or worse, hinder his gameplay. So I'm going to give you my 5 favourite add-ons and a few that I suggest you avoid as well. I also want to mention, and apologies for harping on, I do have a full breakdown, analysis and ranking of his add-ons in this video as well here, so if you want a more comprehensive guide you can go to this. And it is also worth mentioning that if you are just starting as the Dredge, I wouldn't advise running add-ons. Get used to his base power so that you don't handicap yourself in the future if you don't have those add-ons to rely on. But, for the sake of argument and in no particular order, my 5 favourite add-ons for the Dredge are as follows. Firstly, we have the Maulthinker Skull, which increases the amount of charges gained to Nightfall with every injured survivor by 66%. So, as I said in his power, Dredge gets 1 charge per second for injured survivors. This add-on makes it 1.66 charges per second per survivor, and though it may not sound like a lot, this can actually be really incredible for Nightfall traction and getting this as many times as you can throughout the trial, which of course is what you want. Next, I would recommend the Boat Key, which increases teleporting speeds when not in Nightfall by 25%, and when the 5th generator is completed, all locked lockers will immediately break. Honestly, the locks breaking is a fine addition to this add-on, but it is just as strong for the teleporting speed alone, as in the daytime, darting from one side to the other can be quite slow, whereas this helps a lot with that and allows Dredge to act much more faster in the trial. Thirdly, I would suggest Haddy's Calendar, a simple add-on that reduces the time it takes to emerge from a locker by a single second. Now again, doesn't sound like much, but the element of surprise is so much easier to achieve when you can exit lockers quicker, and this can really render locked lockers useless as you exit them as you would a normal speed anyway. Fourth, I would suggest Field Recorder. This causes Nightfall to trigger at the start of your trial and when 5 generators have been completed, as well as inflicting survivors with exhaustion when they run through your remnant. These 2 extra Nightfalls are why you probably want to run this add-on, as it's worth it for that alone. Dredge is strongest in Nightfall, and having 2 extra guaranteed Nightfalls is never a bad thing, especially at the start of the game. However, the exhaustion when running through a remnant is also a fine addition. And finally, I would suggest Bent Pages, which increases the amount of Nightfall gained from injuring survivors by 25%. So instead of gaining 20 charges, you'd gain 25. Again, may not seem like much, but it really does add up and help achieve Nightfall faster. This is also amazing when paired with the Maulthinker Skull. Now for the add-ons that I'd avoid as Dredge, there's only 3, that being the War Helmet, the Mortar and Pestle, and the Sacrificial Sword. Now War Helmet and Mortar and Pestle you can still run, but I just don't feel like they really add anything significant to the match at all. However, I suppose there isn't a negative towards them. However, Sacrificial Knife is absolutely terrible and so situational, it would even make a bad yellow add-on, let alone one of his only 2 iridescents. But thankfully, it is only these 3 that I would avoid, all the others are absolutely fine to run. Now it's time for the tips and tricks I'd recommend you use whilst playing the Dredge. With this, hopefully you will be able to take full advantage of his power and to the best of his abilities. So, let's get straight into them. My first tip is simple, however I don't see anywhere near enough Dredges doing this. Break the sodding locks. Now, obviously don't drop a chase to break a lock, however if a survivor is looping you around a tile, or you've recently hooked a survivor close to a locked locker, please break the locks with a basic attack. This could make your life so much easier in the future with teleporting, as you never know when you might need these lockers, so yeah, break the bastard things. Next, I would suggest really getting used to your teleporting, specifically mid-chase, especially during Nightfall. Now, there is a fine line between underusing it and overusing it, and sometimes you do get it wrong. But by not trying to capitalise off this power during a chase, you are severely nerfing what the Dredge can do. I'd recommend starting small. Just teleport to a locker a couple of meters away during a chase, as even that can close the gap between you and the survivor, allowing for a faster hit. Then, the more you get comfortable in doing this, the more brave and unpredictable you can be. It is really an underused tool. Now, speaking of teleporting, we have to talk about returning to his remnant around loops. Now, firstly, the worst loops for Dredge are long loops with low structures that survivors can see over, such as the tyres around Autohaven, so you'll have to be careful here. Dredge can use his remnant best around either short loops or loops with high walls. The idea is that you want to hide your remnant from the survivor as best as you can. If they can't see it, it will be much harder for them to try and mind game around it. However, something I've found out as well is if you're forced to use your remnant around a long loop, use it sooner rather than later. Survivors expect you to mind game and push them into it, so if you use it within 2 seconds of placing it, 9 times out of 10 you'll probably catch them off guard. The longer you hold it, the more time you give survivors to plan a mind game or decide to leave the loop entirely. So one of the Dredge's weaknesses is that he's incredibly map dependent. Even though he is a stronger killer than most, this is mainly down to the frequency and placement of the lockers within the trial. So if you're on a map like Backwater Swamp or the Red Forest, try to capitalise on pressure you build more than you already would. Try harder to hook survivors in basements and hotspots, as these are the parts that you will frequent more. It may sound like a bit of an odd tip, but the lack of lockers on maps can really alter his playstyle. So try to force the survivors to fight in the same half of the map rather than freely being able to zoom around the map without consequence. and hopefully the more you kind of do this, the more you'll understand what I mean by it. Now, we also have to talk about the Nightfall. Now, we all know, or at least I hope we do, I've mentioned it many times, Nightfall is when Dredge is at his strongest. And once again, I see far too many Dredges not take full advantage of this. They will walk around the map just trying to see highlights of the survivors in white, whilst in Nightfall. What you need to be doing is going as aggressive as you possibly can in this stance. Bounce around from locker to locker, use your power as much as you can to find survivors, get into the chases, injuring survivors, and shut everything down. Survivors in Nightfall are very often paranoid and on edge during it, so throw everything you can at them. They are really going to struggle if you apply your aggression correctly. Now, this point is true of all killers, but with Dredge, you want to try your hardest to push survivors into tile that you can use to your advantage. Using the wrong locker or attacking from the wrong direction can sometimes give survivors a great chance to run into a strong tile. Whereas, if you pick a different locker and come in from a more unexpected angle, not only will they maybe more of a delayed reaction, but when they finally do react, they may find themselves being forced to a tile that is more to your advantage than it is to theirs. Now, this will take some time to get used to, of course, map preference and tile placement, but definitely try to keep this in mind when going for chases. Now, this one, again, is going to be a bit of a weird one, but sometimes doing nothing is the best play you can make. Now, as Dredge, survivors will assume that you are going to throw mind games on top of mind games, so sometimes by not doing anything and just standing still, survivors will panic and throw themselves into your lovingly shadowy arms. This is especially important around small loops. The amount of times survivors bottleneck themselves into terrible situations, and all you need to do is wait for them to make the first move instead of you making it and missing an easy hit. Again, sometimes doing nothing really benefits the Dredge. Now, Dredge is one of the most versatile killers in the roster due to his power more or less ticking every aspect you need in a killer. He can be amazing for experimentation, and not only does that freshen up his playstyle, but survivors as well won't know what to expect when facing you. So make sure you're swapping perks and playstyles to really utilise what he is capable of, and of course the more you play him in different ways, the more you will learn and be better as Dredge all around. So get crazy, get experimental. Another tip that I have, and this one will definitely separate the good Dredges from the great, it's to do with placing your remnant. Now, when placing your remnant, you need to make quick, logical decisions about where you want to place it around a tile, and more importantly, what direction you're facing when you place it. As being able to think ahead, knowing where you're going to push survivors can be so handy in minimising the disorientation that you can have when teleporting back. And it actually makes the process faster, knowing when you can emerge, you can hopefully just swing for the hit instead of having to look around, figure out where you are, and then attack the survivor. And also never place the remnant directly on pallets or vaults, always next to it, ready to lead survivors through it to attack. And honestly folks, I think that's all the tips that I have for Dredge for you to steadily increase your strengths with him, but if you have any tips that I've missed, feel free to leave them down in the comments below. More information is never a bad thing. So finally, it is time to learn how to counter the Dredge for those looking to stand a better chance at fighting him. But this is going to be helpful for Dredge players as well, as you can start to recognise survivors who may prove to be stronger links in the trial, which is always good to know. So let's get to the tips. Now, tip number one is to try and stick to long loops with no high walls, as it will be much harder for the Dredge to mind game you with his remnant if you can see it. And if you see a good time to do so, leave the tile to a new one to constantly keep him guessing, and then just alternate between the two loops to really make him struggle. Next one, and this is something I see far too many survivors doing, is that you only need to lock one locker at a time, otherwise he can break the locks and the tile it can now not be used against him. Lock the lockers with a purpose, and when you know it will benefit you like Nightfall. Third tip is, if you can, try not to take protection or unnecessary hits against the Dredge, as doing so will charge his Nightfall faster, especially if he's running add-ons like the Maul Thinker Skull or the Burnt Letters. And on the same note, heal as often as you can, because the second that you're healthy again, he does not get the extra charges. Next, for Dredge, teleporting mid-chase can be very risky if he doesn't know how to do it effectively, so if you're against a Dredge who overuses his teleport, just leave tiles and try to make as much distance as you can to waste his time, because at the end of the day he will either continue chasing you at a disadvantage or leave you entirely. Now next, and no matter what, do not enter lockers close to key areas of the map such as gens, hooks, or even the shack, as these are lockers that the dredge will teleport to the most. If you have to enter a locker, try to pick one in the middle of nowhere, although keep in mind that this isn't guaranteed as safe and is still actually rather risky. And when you are in Nightfall and safely able to do so, walk through the remnant he leaves behind if he charges his power, as if you walk through this during Nightfall, it will actually shorten the time Nightfall is active. Next is to be extra cautious in Nightfall. Nightfall, of course, is Dredge's strongest form, and don't forget teleporting gives him info, so hiding is useless. My advice is to stay away from lockers if you can, but still try to progress the game. Heal yourself, heal teammates, and where possible, work on gens. And also lock locker doors if you think you safely can. And finally, do not bottleneck yourself into loops like this if you can help it, as against the dredge, loops like this are incredible for more or less a guaranteed hit. All he has to do is be a little bit patient and he will get the hit one way or another. And there we are, folks, everything you need to know about the dredge, and hopefully no matter the skill level you'll be able to take something away from this and apply this into your next games. And that also wraps it up for the first 3 weeks with. I really do appreciate you all sticking around for this and learning alongside me. It was a ton of fun, and the support you have all shown me during this first killer is beyond overwhelming, like honestly, so I thank you for that. And it also gives me great pleasure in saying that the next killer has been chosen, and his 3 weeks will start on Monday the 26th, and of course is going to be on the newest killer to the roster, Wesker, aka the Mastermind. So feel free to swing by Twitch to learn with me, or keep a lookout for all of the vids that I'll be making on him in the coming weeks. But thank you all so much for watching. Don't forget to like and subscribe for more Dead by Daylight content. I have rambled far too long as it is, so thank you all again. Hope you have a fantastic day. Take care. Bye bye for now.